welcome back to the deep dive. If you're here with us, it means you operate at a pace where, time is the ultimate constraint.
Right. And you value knowing more, faster.
Exactly. You want all that information distilled into those critical, actionable insights. So we've taken the stack of sources you gave us, notes on human performance, cognitive studies, all of it.
And we're going to give you what is essentially the operational manual for your own 24-hour cycle.
Today, we're doing a really fascinating piece of reverse engineering.
We really are. We're dissecting something that feels so simple, but is fundamentally complex. We're calling it the architecture of our daily lives.
I love that phrase. And we're moving beyond just the surface level stuff, right?
We're way beyond it. We're not just looking at what we do. We're getting into the psychological and physiological machinery that governs those actions.
That's right. Because when most people talk about their day, it's just a boring checklist. I wake up, I eat, I work.
A purely chronological recitation. It tells you nothing.
But we're pushing past that. We're getting into the phenomenology of the day.
And phenomenology, just to be clear, is the study of consciousness from a first-person point of view.
So not just the action, but the experience of the action.
That's it, exactly. We're looking at the rituals, the circadian rhythms, the psychological transitions that really shape our performance.
So our mission here is twofold. First, we want to articulate the mundane with precision. We're using some high-level language here to really elevate your understanding of your own time.
And second, to unlock those aha moments, to help you understand why some parts of the day feel so hard and how you can strategically optimize them. We're upgrading the vocabulary we use to describe life.
Okay, let's unpack this, and let's start at the very beginning, which is often the point of highest resistance.
The awakening. That necessary, often painful shift from the subconscious to the conscious. It's almost never a smooth, cinematic moment.
No, absolutely not. For most people, the research shows it is a significant, immediate battle against inertia, both psychological and physical.
And that alarm clock, it isn't a gentle cue, it's a jarring intrusion.
A jarring intrusion. That's the perfect way to put it. And this brings us right to our first critical concept. Sleep inertia.
Sleep inertia isn't just a feeling. It's a measurable cognitive fog. That grogginess, the disorientation you feel, that's real impairment.
So physiologically, what's happening?
Well, your brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which handles all the complex stuff, decision-making, executive function, it's just not fully online yet.
It's still moving up.
It's booting up. Cerebral blood flow is lower. The system is still running on low power.
So it's a quantifiable deficit in competence. Remember the notes we reviewed cited a grace period.
That's right, a grace period of about 20 minutes before you can really achieve cognitive competence. For some people, if they're sleep deprived, it can be a lot longer.
And that 20-minute figure is so important. It's the time needed for blood flow and cortical arousal to get back to normal.
You're waiting for the system to pressurize. That's a great way to think about it. And during those first few minutes, trying to do anything complex is, well, it's a bad idea.
Performance can be as bad as if you'd been awake for 24 hours straight.
That's a staggering comparison, isn't it? It means that trying to draft a critical email or plan your day in those first few minutes is structurally doomed to fail. You haven't pierced the fog.
So this leads to a key insight for optimization. Your first 20 minutes have to demand almost zero cognitive energy.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of a utilitarian regimen comes in. This rigid protocol acts as a kind of sensory and psychological anchor.
I really appreciate that framing. A rigid protocol to minimize cognitive load when you're least capable. So the actions, hydration, hygiene, they have to be automatic.
Zero conscious decision-making power. They're just small, reliable inputs telling your nervous system, okay, it's time to transition.
So the cold water is a physical shock to the system.
It activates the sympathetic nervous system, yeah. And the hygiene routine, brushing your teeth, washing your face, provides these really intense sensory inputs.
The blast of cold water, the minty taste. They're sensory kickstarts. They leverage our sensory pathways to speed up the arousal process.
And the routine has to preempt any decisions. If you're standing there wondering, should I wash my face now? You've already lost.
It has to be a chain reaction. Get up, water, wash, brush, immediate.
But then there's the true linchpin ritual, the one that signals the day has really begun.
Coffee, the elixir of life, as the sources called it.
And while the caffeine is obviously critical for focus later on, The ritual itself is just as important psychologically. The sources really emphasize the power of olfactory stimulation.
The smell.
The smell of the beans grinding, the coffee brewing. It's a powerful trigger, a recognition signal for the brain.
It's a powerful environmental cue, right?
Right.
You've spent years associating that specific smell with start of work or focus time.
So the smell alone starts activating alertness pathways before the caffeine even hits your system. It's the ultimate predictable cue that says, okay, systems check, power up.
And this kind of psychological structure extends to breakfast. The preference for something austere, low maintenance.
Simple toast, oats, a protein shake with the same ingredients every day. It's not an accident.
It's a strategy. It's about combating decision fatigue.
Let's deepen that definition, because it's not just being tired of deciding.
No, it's a measurable deterioration in the quality of your decisions after you've made a lot of them.
You have a finite pool of executive function for making good choices each day. And even trivial choices, low-stakes choices, draw from that same pool.
So if you deplete that energy early in the morning, deciding on a complex breakfast or what to wear,
you have less capacity left for the critical choices later on, the complex problem solving, the difficult conversations.
this is a core strategy of high performers.
Yeah.
We see it all the time.
It's what we call energy arbitrage. Steve Jobs with the turtleneck, presidents with their scripted mornings. It's not a lack of imagination.
It's a deep understanding of the cognitive cost of decision-making.
They strategically minimize choices in low-stakes areas to preserve their cognitive reserves for the high-stakes work.
I understand the principle, but I have to ask, doesn't that kind of rigidity risk, stifling creativity? Don't you just go on autopilot?
That's a great question, and it's a valid friction point. The goal isn't rigidity in thought, but rigidity in implementation.
Okay, so you automate the external to free up the internal.
Precisely. You turn the routine into background processing, so the foreground, where creativity happens, stays clear. The risk of decision fatigue crippling a huge meeting is just. It's far greater than the marginal benefit of choosing a different yogurt flavor.
That reframes it perfectly. So the energy you save in the morning is immediately needed for the next phase.
The transition to work.
You're groomed, fed, and you've minimized fatigue. Now you have to bridge the domestic and the professional. And that bridge is the commute.
And the commute is, anthropologically speaking, the perfect example of a liminal space.
Let's define liminality with precision for our listeners.
It comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold.
A threshold.
So a liminal space is a transitionary state, a zone where you're not here, your identity at home, and you're not there, your professional identity at work, you're suspended in between.
It's fascinating, especially when you think about these highly cerebral jobs, software engineering, consulting, that are purely mental, but the bridge to get there is entirely physical.
And that physical journey is a necessary kinetic buffer. It forces a separation between those two identities. And the sources showed two totally different but equally effective ways of managing this liminal space.
Let's start with the driver, the person and their mobile sanctuary.
Right. The driver has the highest degree of environmental control, the temperature, the audio, the pace. Even in traffic, there's a sense of control. The car is a self-contained psychological pod.
It's a controlled environment for what the sources call decomposing thoughts.
It's not passive time. It's a structured mental warm-up. You're sorting, prioritizing the problems you're about to face, but without the pressure of having to solve them yet.
It's a systems check, identifying the top 3 priorities that are going to hit you as soon as you walk in the door.
Exactly. This is an intentional transition. And that mobile sanctuary also acts as a psychological boundary. You're shielded from the city's cacophony.
But the contrast with the public transit rider is huge. This is the world of collective solitude.
A wonderful paradox.
It really is. Public transit can be chaotic, loud, crowded, but the commuter finds real value in the anonymity.
That anonymity grants you a unique freedom. Freedom from social obligation. You're surrounded by people, but the social contract says you engage with no one.
You're observed, but not expected to interact.
And the mechanism for enforcing this is almost always technological.
The noise-canceling headphones.
The headphones.
Yeah.
They create this impenetrable cognitive shield. They transform a dense physical space into one of intense personal focus. You can read, review documents, or just observe.
You're a solitary entity, even while you're physically pressed up against other people.
So whether it's the control of the driver's cab or the anonymity of the subway, the function is the same.
Intentional transition and decompression. One uses control to find structure, The other uses anonymity to find focus.
And the goal is that when you cross that threshold, when you swipe the badge, the professional persona is fully online and ready to go. The domestic noise is gone.
And once that threshold is crossed, you enter the professional sphere, which is immediately defined by its own friction.
A constant demanding dichotomy. On one hand, you need deep, focused cognition. On the other,
Collaborative friction.
collaborative friction, yes. The source's witty term for the endless stream of meetings, status updates, and pings that constantly disrupt deep work.
And for any job requiring sustained mental effort, coding, financial analysis, design, that friction is the #1 enemy of productivity.
Which is why the office morning doesn't start with work. It starts with triage.
Rapid, high-stakes priority setting under pressure. You walk in and you're hit with an avalanche of emails, messages, requests.
All of them vying for that mental energy you so carefully preserved. So the first step is sorting. You have to deploy a framework like the Eisenhower matrix to decide what's urgent, what's important.
The sources suggested this is maybe the most critical 5 minutes of the day because it sets your focus trajectory.
It's the difference between being reactive and being proactive. You're using your freshest energy to build a cognitive wall around your priorities. And the highest priority is almost always achieving the flow state.
Flow, the gold standard of productive consciousness. The state described by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Where the difficulty of the task perfectly matches your skill set.
And the characteristics are so distinct. Time dilates. Hours feel like minutes.
Action and awareness merge. Your focus is just purely on the problem. Self-consciousness vanishes.
It's the single most valuable mental resource for a knowledge worker.
And yet, it's incredibly fragile. It can take, 15 to 25 minutes of unbroken concentration just to get into flow.
But it can be shattered in an instant by that collaborative friction.
And the cost of that interruption is massive. It's not just the 30 seconds it takes to check a notification. The switching cost, the time and energy to get back into that deep focus, can be 15 minutes or more.
So you're destroying hours of momentum with a few simple check-ins.
Which means the strategy for the workday has to shift from just doing work to actively defending the flow state.
Through environmental design headphones, turning off notifications, and time blocking.
Yeah.
Creating non-negotiable blocks for deep work.
So the morning is all about achieving and ruthlessly defending that high-intensity focus. But you can't sustain it forever. You need a forced reset.
Which brings us to lunch, which is so much more than just sustenance. The sources were clear. It's a necessary recalibration, a critical intermission.
You have to actively reverse the effects of cognitive saturation. Staring at a screen for hours exhausts the brain's directed attention system. The break has to be a hard break.
And the most neurologically efficient way to do that is through biophilic exposure.
Biophilia, our innate tendency to seek connection with nature. So biophilic exposure is just intentionally seeking out that connection.
Seeing trees, the sky, patterns in leaves. It's not just getting fresh air. It's tied to attention restoration theory.
Can you explain that connection for us?
Of course. Natural environments provide what's called soft fascination. They capture our attention effortlessly, without requiring that high-effort focus that work demands.
Like the fractal patterns in a leaf or a tree branch?
Exactly. Those patterns allow the directed attention system, the part that's exhausted, to rest and recover. It's like a passive mental massage.
So even a quick 10-minute walk down a tree-lined street, or just looking out a window at some nature, acts like a physiological reset button for the mind.
It helps your eyes and your brain prepare to re-engage with the demanding focus of the afternoon.
It is an absolutely non-negotiable part of cognitive hygiene, especially when you consider the health risks of the sedentary nature of modern work.
Let's be clear on that term. Sedentary, from the Latin sedere, to sit. It means a lifestyle with prolonged periods of sitting and very little exercise.
And the metabolic consequences are immediate and serious. Prolonged sitting suppresses enzymes that help process fats and sugars.
It leads to metabolic slowing, cardiovascular risks, musculoskeletal problems.
So that midday walk is a direct intervention against this systemic hazard. It boosts circulation and, crucially, it combats that post-lunch lethargy that can just kill afternoon productivity.
So it's an investment in both your health and your mental clarity for the second half of the day, which is when the strategy shifts again. It becomes a focused race against the clock.
Right. With that renewed clarity, you prioritize and execute the remaining high-value work. You have to be efficient because you know that end-of-day fatigue is coming on fast.
The accumulation of decision fatigue and just general attentional exhaustion.
So you front-load the most demanding tasks into that period right after lunch, when you're refreshed.
And you save the low-effort stuff admin, non-urgent emails for the very last hour.
Exactly. The quality of your work plummets in that last hour. So anything requiring deep original thought has to be done before them. It's about strategic sequencing.
And now we move to a moment of really profound psychological weight, the symbolic act of ending the day.
The sources called this the moment of severance.
The physical closing of the laptop screen, hitting shut down.
That moment is essential. It's the physical manifestation of psychological closure. It signals the non-negotiable end of your professional commitment for the day. It prevents perseveration.
The involuntary preoccupation with work problems long after you've left.
You have to sever that connection, and immediately you re-enter the liminal space, the second commute. But for drivers, it's often a totally different experience.
It transforms into a necessary decompression chamber.
The pressure is off. The morning commute is preparatory. The evening commute is about intentional mental disarmament.
The goal is to shed the professional persona completely.
Because if you walk in the door still troubleshooting code in your head, you've failed the transition. The decompression chamber lets your cognitive processes slow down naturally.
That dedicated time is vital. It creates the space you need to be present for your personal life.
And this leads us to the evening's main domestic anchor, dinner.
And the sources didn't define this as just consumption. It was a mandatory communal event, prioritized for connection and discourse.
It provides essential structure. It's a fixed point that necessitates high-bandwidth human interaction. That conversation is vital for social bonding and for anchoring your mind firmly in the domestic sphere.
It's the moment of conscious reconnection, a way to ensure communication happens instead of everyone just fragmenting off to their own devices.
But once that anchor is released, we face the modern challenge, the choice between productive engagement and, well, sheer idleness.
The source was very honest about oscillating between reading complex books and then falling victim to the modern curse.
Which is, of course, doom scrolling on the phone.
The addictive act of just endlessly consuming negative, anxiety-inducing content.
It's so pernicious because it replaces meaningful rest with this low-effort, high-anxiety consumption loop. Instead of letting your nervous system repair, you're loading it with external stressors.
That constant low-level agitation is profoundly counterproductive to the ultimate goal of the evening, which is preparing for sleep.
Which leads directly to the critical counter-strategy, the digital sunset. The recommendation was clear. No screens after 10:00 p.m.
Okay, but I have to challenge the practicality of a hard 10 p.m. cutoff. What if a work emergency comes up? Or if you use an e-ink reader, which isn't stimulating in the same way?
That's a fair point, and the strategy needs nuance. But the rule is based on physiology, not convenience. The 10 p.m. benchmark is a guideline, but the blue light suppression has to be absolute.
Because a priority is circadian alignment. E-ink is fine because it doesn't emit that critical blue light spectrum.
So let's go deep on circadian alignment. Why is the digital sunset so crucial, physiologically?
Well, circadian alignment is the synchronization of your internal 24-hour biological clock with external cues, primarily light and dark.
And the blue light from our screens is a powerful and immediate suppressor of melatonin production.
Melatonin being the key hormone that tells your body it's dark and time to prepare for sleep.
Exactly. When your brain's clock, the SCN, detects blue light, it tells the pineal gland to stop making melatonin. You're basically tricking your body into thinking it's midday. It compromises the quality and structure of your sleep.
So by enforcing a digital sunset, you're sending the correct, natural signals to your nervous system. You're allowing melatonin to rise naturally.
And the recommended replacement is reflective solitude, maybe with some ambient music or quiet reading.
These are vastly superior methods because they encourage active, non-reactive relaxation. Journaling, planning the next day, you process events without the stress of external input.
And ambient music provides a gentle auditory focus without the demanding narrative of speech or disruptive visuals. It helps downregulate the nervous system for a restful sleep.
Which ensures the entire cycle can begin again tomorrow without a sleep debt.
And with that, we've completed the full 24-hour journey. We've taken the ordinary framework of a day and applied this high-level cognitive analysis. We've detailed the architecture of the quotidian.
And we've done it by embedding a powerful new lexicon into how you think about your time. Before we wrap this deep dive, let's just synthesize those core concepts. Because the power is in articulating these forces with precision.
Let's quickly re-anchor these terms. We spent a lot of time on the transition points, the thresholds.
That threshold, of course, being the liminal space, that transitionary state where you aren't here and you aren't there.
Yeah.
Understanding that forces you to use that time intentionally.
And we explored the key strategic challenge of the morning, decision fatigue, the measurable erosion of your decision quality.
Which is why that austere, low-maintenance start is so critical. It preserves your high-value cognitive energy for the real work later.
Then for the evening strategy, designed for regeneration, we have circadian alignment.
The synchronization of your internal clock with external cues. The digital sunset is a non-negotiable tactic for maximizing sleep quality.
We also identified those critical interventions, combating the sedentary hazard with mandatory biophilic exposure at midday,
which serves as a necessary reset for your exhausted, directed attention system. And we detail the immediate hurdle of the day, the sleep inertia you have to pierce in those first 20 minutes.
The ultimate takeaway is that your routine is not a collection of arbitrary habits. It's a structured system governed by measurable forces. And now you have the language to articulate those forces.
So challenge yourself. Don't just say you have trouble waking up. Describe the inertia. Don't complain about traffic. Describe the managed solitude of your liminal space.
And as we close this deep dive, we'll leave you with a final provocative thought, a way to apply this knowledge immediately.
How can you systematically build more intentional, conscious liminal spaces or intermissions into your schedule, beyond just the commute and lunch, specifically to preserve mental energy and ensure better, more robust circadian alignment?
Think about where else you can introduce the power of the threshold. Until next time, keep optimizing.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are really ripping the cover off the dictionary. We're moving way past that passive idea of just, understanding what words mean. We're getting into the deliberate, almost high-stakes game of C2 language proficiency.
It's a linguistic deep dive, absolutely, but it's a very specific one, looking into the structure of everyday life, what our source material calls the architecture of the quotidian.
The architecture of the quotidian. I love that phrase.
It's great, isn't it? We're looking at some advanced material here from advanced lexical analysis, and our mission, really, is to reverse engineer the language of our daily routines.
Right.
And this isn't just about, general comprehension. It's about understanding the texture of the language.
Exactly. The texture. Why does an advanced speaker choose one specific word over another? What's the subtle shade of meaning or the hidden intention that they inject into a conversation?
Yes.
We're basically dissecting the language choices that make your communication precise, sophisticated, and I think truly impactful. If you want to sound not just correct, but genuinely compelling, this is how you do it.
C2 mastery, at the end of the day, is all about rhetorical power. It's those subtle connotations, the deliberate deployment of specific lexical items.
Lexical items. So the words you choose.
The words you choose, exactly. They reveal not just what you're talking about, but how you view that reality. And we're going to prove today that you can use these incredibly high-level rhetorical tools, even when you're just describing something as mundane as getting out of bed or eating breakfast.
I think using that mundane context is genius, actually, because it forces us to integrate these complex terms in a natural way.
Right. It keeps it grounded.
It does. It keeps us from sounding like we just, swallowed a thesaurus and are trying to awkwardly regurgitate big words.
That's a fantastic way to put it. Natural integration is the absolute goal here.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to follow the physical and psychological architecture of a typical day. We'll start with that morning transition, that struggle. Then we'll move through some midday strategies for protection and delay. Then we're going to pause for a really critical grammatical deep dive.
Yes, that's a key part.
And finally, we'll finish up with the language of evening release and recovery. So let's start with that morning struggle, the one we all know a little too well.
The battle begins.
For so many of us, that moment the alarm goes off. It isn't just a signal that we need to be moving. It feels like a heavy invisible weight pushing you back down into the mattress.
Oh, yeah.
That physical and mental drag is just so palpable. And our source material gives us a very specific, high-level term for this experience: sleep inertia.
And this is a perfect demonstration of what we're talking about. It's adopting precise, almost scientific terminology to describe a very common psychological experience. That right there is a hallmark of C2 proficiency.
You're borrowing a term.
You're borrowing the term inertia directly from physics, and its presence in the language of daily life it elevates the conversation immediately.
Okay, so bring us back to high school physics for a moment. What's the fundamental concept here?
Well, if you recall Newton's first law of motion, it basically describes the tendency of an object to resist a change in its state of motion.
Right. An object at rest wants to stay at rest.
Exactly. An object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion. It's that inherent resistance to shifting from one status to another.
So when you apply that to the brain and body in the morning,
it's a perfect fit. When we apply inertia to that psychological transition from sleep to wakefulness, it perfectly captures that heavy, sluggish feeling. Your brain, an object in a state of rest, is actively physically resisting the transition to a state of motion or high activity.
So this is more than just being groggy.
So much more. It's not simply saying, oh, I'm still sleepy. This implies a literal physiological and mental resistance. It's a friction that has to be overcome by some kind of force, whether it's external or internal.
I think using inertia is just so much more powerful rhetorically than saying, I felt tired or I was groggy.
Why do you think that is?
Well, when you say groggy, it feels temporary, kind of minor.
Yeah.
But when you mention inertia, you're framing your struggle in the terms of a fundamental physical law. It gives it weight.
Absolutely. And that subtle rhetorical shift makes your statement so much stronger. It validates the struggle in a way.
Right.
When you tell someone, look, I spent 20 minutes battling some deep sleep inertia this morning, you communicate the intensity of that initial mental pushback far more effectively. You're applying the language of force and resistance to your internal state.
Okay, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate for a second.
Please do.
Doesn't using a term like sleep inertia just sound, I don't know, a little bit fancy? A pretentious way to describe hitting the snooze button 3 times. Where's the line?
That is a critical question. I think for any advanced learner, that's the question you should always be asking. The line is defined by your intent and your context. If you use it just to show off in a really casual setting, yeah, it can sound pretentious, for sure. But in the context of describing, say, a focused commitment to productivity, or in a medical or psychological discussion, it's just pure precision.
So it's about matching the tool to the job.
Exactly. We use it to imply that the feeling of mental impairment, that slowed reaction time, reduced memory, the disorientation, is a measurable, almost physical phenomenon tied to that change in state.
Yes.
It gives the resistance, as you said, gravitas.
I also love the power of the word because it offers a little bit of hope.
How so?
Well, if the difficulty is only the initial friction, then once you do overcome that mental pushback, once you move from rest to motion, the very nature of inertia suggests you're likely to stay in motion. You'll remain productive throughout the day. The challenge isn't the ongoing energy, it's the activation energy.
And that concept, that idea of overcoming resistance, leads us directly to a crucial high-level collocation, overcoming inertia. That phrase is incredibly versatile. It's so useful far beyond just waking up. For you, the learner, pairing overcoming with inertia instantly signals an advanced command of the language.
Why? What does it signal?
It signals that you're framing the resistance not as some minor trouble, but as a foundational structural barrier that needs to be broken through.
Can you give us some examples? How is this collocation used effectively in, say, a professional or a policy context?
Oh, all the time. Think about corporate strategy. A CEO won't stand up and say, you know, it's hard to get people to change.
No, it sounds weak.
It sounds weak. They'll say, we need to overcome the organizational inertia that resists adopting new agile methodologies.
Right.
By choosing inertia, they frame that resistance as deeply ingrained as systemic. They imply it requires significant force to shift, which then justifies major restructuring efforts or expense. It's all about framing the problem powerfully.
Or you hear it in government policy discussions, especially with these huge, complex, entrenched issues like climate change or infrastructure renewal.
Yeah.
You hear statements like, the necessary legislation faces deep political inertia due to vested interests.
Exactly. It signifies a heavy foundational resistance that requires sustained, serious effort to defeat. It's not just a simple hurdle, it's the language you use to describe a powerful system pushing back.
So for the listener, mastering this phrase lets you communicate that the roadblock you're facing is structural and fundamental.
Right. Rather than superficial or temporary. It elevates the perceived seriousness of your challenge.
That's a fantastic deep dive into the physical struggle. Now let's stick with the morning, but pivot from that physical resistance to intentional ritual.
Okay.
Many of us, driven by that fight against inertia and the need for efficiency, choose extreme simplicity in our routine. Our source material used the term austere to describe specific breakfast habits.
Austere is a beautiful word. It carries significant weight, and its C2 usage often involves a sophisticated form of what I'd call rhetorical stretching.
Okay, stretching, what do you mean?
Well, its traditional meaning refers to something severe or strictly disciplined in manner. We often read about a historical figure who lived an austere life, a hermit, a monk, an ascetic.
Right. The core idea is strictness, self-denial, avoidance of pleasure.
Precisely. That severity, that self-imposed deprivation is the key component. Now, when we apply it to diet or living conditions, the meaning shifts a little. It focuses instead on the lack of comfort or luxury.
So simple, unadorned.
Very simple, unadorned, severely limited. You might think of an austere interior, design stripped, bare, functional, maybe even a little cold.
Okay, here's my challenge on this one then. If someone says their breakfast is austere and it's, I don't know, a bowl of plain oats and water, aren't they just trying too hard?
Yes.
Why not just say I had a plain breakfast?
And that is where the C2 rhetorical analysis comes in. You are absolutely right that calling plain oats austere is an exaggeration, but that's the whole point. When an advanced speaker uses austere in this context, they are engaging in a deliberate form of hyperbole. They're exaggerating for rhetorical effect.
So it's not meant to be taken as literal truth? It's a statement about their character or their commitment to something?
It's a statement of intentionality. You are not actually living like a monk, but by using a word associated with profound severity and self-denial, you convey a very strong impression of self-discipline, of restraint.
An intentional rejection of morning indulgence.
An intentional rejection, exactly. You're using the word to set a tone for the rest of your day. It's less about the oats, and it's much more about the psychological posture you are adopting.
It sets the stage for the rest of your day. It's almost like you're announcing your serious intent. By choosing austere over simple or plain, you're signaling a sophisticated control over your environment and your habits.
Yes.
You're not lacking anything. You're choosing severity for the sake of efficiency or focus.
That is the crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Choosing severity. If I say, I had a simple breakfast, it's merely descriptive. It's maybe even a little boring.
Right.
But if I say, my weekday breakfast is deliberately austere, I am making a sophisticated statement about my personal commitment to efficiency and restraint, all in service of a larger goal. The hyperbole is intentional, it's playful, and it's deeply communicative.
I can see how this concept extends to professional fields as well. You could describe an austere writing style, for example.
Meaning it's stripped bare of flowery adjectives. It's functional, it's direct.
Yeah. Or what about in finance?
Oh, absolutely. During a recession, governments often adopt austere fiscal policies. Now, this doesn't mean they stop spending entirely.
Of course not.
But it means that spending is severely limited, it's prioritized, and it lacks any element of excess or comfort. The severity is in the adherence to a strict financial limitation.
And crucially, this usage helps us differentiate between synonyms. If something is minimalist, it implies a design aesthetic. If it's austere, it implies a degree of necessary rigor or even hardship.
Precisely. If I describe a room as minimalist, it's a style choice. It could be quite luxurious. But if I describe it as austere, it suggests the inhabitants are intentionally denying themselves comfort, maybe for ethical or practical reasons.
So the word carries a kind of moral or disciplinary weight that simpler synonyms just don't have.
They lack it entirely. So for the learner, mastering this word means understanding how to use that little bit of rhetorical excess, that hyperbole, to convey your internal discipline.
Okay, so as we move from that self-imposed discipline of the morning into the chaotic demands of the working day, we often search for ways to maintain our stability, to put a boundary between ourselves and all the external noise. For a lot of people, that commute or their personal workspace becomes a brief sanctuary, a bubble of focus.
Right.
And our sources shift from that idea of a sanctuary to the idea of being insulated.
Sanctuary is a lovely poetic word, but insulated is where the real C2 utility lies, especially when you're discussing structural dynamics.
So what's the core meaning?
Technically, to be insulated means to be protected by some kind of interposing material that prevents the loss of heat, or the intrusion of sound, or the conduction of electricity. It's fundamentally about separation and boundary maintenance.
So when we talk about being insulated in our car or in a focused office, the material, the doors, the window glass, the noise-canceling headphones is physically or digitally keeping the external chaos out. We're preventing intrusion.
That literal definition is our foundation. But the power of the word is almost entirely in its metaphorical usage, which is what we are really after here.
Right.
We use insulated constantly to describe a state of being protected from emotional, financial, political, or informational harshness.
And this is where it gets really applicable to business and policy. Can you give us some examples of those metaphorical uses?
Sure. Think about corporate governance. A CEO might want the board of directors to be insulated from shareholder activism.
Meaning they're structurally protected from direct short-term pressures.
Exactly. Or consider personal finance. You might structure your investments to be insulated against market volatility by diversifying across different asset classes.
The core meaning stays constant, doesn't it? It's protection from the harshness of the outside world, achieved through a structured boundary.
Yes.
And it suggests that if you remove that protective layer, that boundary, the person or the organization would be immediately vulnerable.
And that vulnerability is often political or social. You might describe someone famous as being socially insulated, surrounded by an entourage and handlers who prevent them from hearing uncomfortable truths or negative criticism.
That brings up a critical nuance. Insulated carries a kind of double-edged connotation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Protection often comes at the cost of detachment or a lack of perspective.
Crucially, yes, that's a very important point. If someone is described as being insulated from reality, we understand that while they might be comfortable and protected from negative consequences,
They're also detached.
they're detached and unaware of the struggles faced by others. It's a highly sophisticated term because it describes a necessary protection while simultaneously criticizing the resulting detachment.
So it's far more powerful than just saying protected or shielded, which are purely positive terms.
I think so. I think shielded implies an active defense against an immediate threat.
Right, like putting up a shield.
Exactly. Insulated, however, implies a more permanent, systemic, structural boundary.
That distinction is key. Insulation is built into the architecture, the car, the office, the financial structure. It's passive, but it's continuous.
It is. So for the learner, especially those working in, say, consulting, management, or risk assessment, this word is invaluable because it allows you to discuss systemic boundaries and risk management with real precision. You're analyzing the structural dynamics of protection.
Now let's move into that inevitable point in the afternoon where the initial energy boost starts to wear down. Fatigue sets in. The slump. The structural protection of the morning is fine, but now we need a specific action, a temporary fix, a bridge to the evening. The crucial high-level phrasal verb here is to stave off.
This is one of those classic phrasal verbs that immediately signals C2 proficiency. It just carries so much more intentionality than its simpler counterparts.
What's the core meaning?
To stave off means to avert or delay something bad, dangerous, or unwanted. The imagery here is very kinetic.
What's the root imagery there?
Well, a stave is a strong stick or a pole or a plank. And historically, it was used to physically push things away.
Okay.
Like using a pole to push a boat away from the dock or away from the shore. You aren't just letting something happen slowly, you are actively pushing back a negative force to keep it at bay.
I can see it. You aren't just letting the inevitable negative thing encroach on you. You are applying a temporary force against it.
Precisely. That stave, that push, is the strategic action. The key collocations really demonstrate this active resistance. We talk about staving off hunger.
Where the threat is weakness or distraction.
Yes. Or staving off a crisis, where the threat is collapse. Or, in our context, staving off fatigue, where the threat is mental exhaustion leading to inefficiency.
I've noticed this verb is often used when the action taken is, it's insufficient for a permanent fix, but it's highly effective for a temporary one.
That connotation of limitation is extremely important. It really defines its sophisticated usage. When you say you are staving off fatigue by drinking a second espresso,
You're admitting it's not a real solution.
you're implicitly admitting it's a temporary solution, yes. You are not fixing the underlying problem, the need for rest, or a better work schedule. You are merely postponing the inevitable confrontation or collapse.
I think this is a great example of where the advanced word choice communicates a strategy.
It absolutely does. If you were to say, I delayed my hunger by eating a snack, it sounds casual, passive even. If you say, I staved off hunger with a small protein bar, it sounds proactive, it sounds strategic, and aware of the limitation of the action. You are managing a threat in the short term. It elevates the action from passive delay to active strategic aversion.
We also hear this in sports all the time. A defensive team might desperately try to stave off a final offensive drive by the opponent,
Yes.
hoping to hold on to their slim lead until the clock runs out. The goal isn't to fix the defense. It's to delay the negative outcome until the time limit makes it irrelevant.
That's a fantastic analogy. It conveys effort, desperation, and that short-term focus. The verb is often used when the stakes are high, even if the action itself is small.
So you could stave off boredom or sadness.
You can stave off boredom, stave off sadness, or stave off decay. In all cases, you are applying a temporary measure against a pervasive, persistent negative influence. For the learner, using stave off rather than just delay instantly communicates a higher awareness of the situation's temporary and potentially strategic nature.
Okay, we spent a lot of time analyzing the precision of vocabulary, but true C2 proficiency isn't just about vocabulary, is it? It's equally defined by the precision of grammar.
Yes, how we structure sentences to maximize their impact.
So let's shift focus entirely now to a critical structure mentioned in our sources, the cleft sentence.
This is perhaps one of the most effective rhetorical tools available to the advanced speaker, and it is a structure that often separates the fluent speaker from the truly proficient communicator.
What are we talking about here? What's the structure?
We are referring to the structure that typically begins with "it is" or "it was," then is followed by the element we want to emphasize, and then it's connected by that or which.
Our source material gave us a great example related to the morning routine, which brings us back to that fight against inertia.
What was it?
It is the olfactory stimulation that truly signals to my brain that the day has commenced.
Right. Now, the obvious question for any learner is, why? Why go to all that structural effort? Why not just say, the olfactory stimulation truly signals to my brain that the day has commenced? It's shorter, it's grammatically fine, it seems more efficient.
Exactly. I want to know the rhetorical cost of choosing the simple version over the advanced structure. What do I lose?
The cost is emphasis. The core reason for deploying the clef structure at an advanced level is to isolate a specific piece of information, whether it's the subject, the object, a time, a place, and to elevate its importance above all other elements in the sentence.
So you're putting a spotlight on it.
You are making a deliberate structural choice to highlight one thing and draw a linguistic spotlight onto it.
So in that example, it is the olfactory stimulation that truly signals. We are isolating the smell, the stimulation, as the single definitive catalyst.
Yes.
We're saying of all the possible triggers, the alarm, the light, the cold floor, the sound of the coffee machine, this specific sensory input is the one that truly matters for my cognitive shift.
Precisely. You isolate X, which makes X the undisputed focus. When you use the simple construction, all the elements often carry a kind of equal informational weight. The cleft sentence breaks that equilibrium. It tells the listener, pay attention, this is the variable I want you to remember.
I always think of it as grammar, acting as a visual aid.
Yeah.
You are framing the sentence as the answer to an implicit question that the listener didn't even know they were asking.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. If the implicit question is, what was the single greatest factor in your success? The answer should be delivered emphatically.
Right.
It was the relentless attention to detail that secured the deal. Not just relentless attention to detail secured the deal. The second is merely a statement of fact. The first is an elevated, persuasive argument.
And that elevation of weight is just crucial for things like presentations or argumented essays. It signals authority.
It absolutely does. Let's analyze another powerful example from the source material, because it shows the structure's power in establishing contrast and causation. The sentence was, it was not the salary, but the working hours that caused him to quit.
In a simple sentence, he quit because of the working hours, not the salary. The contrast is there, but it feels, secondary, a bit flat.
It does. But in the clef structure, we isolate the two variables, salary and hours, and then we use that it was X that Y structure to definitively assign the causality to the working hours.
You're structurally confirming the subject, the hours, and elevating its importance as the true cause above everything else.
Exactly. While simultaneously acknowledging the distraction, the salary, that might confuse your listeners. This is powerful structural manipulation. If you're presenting data on employee retention and you need to hammer home the single most important factor driving turnover, the cleft sentence is your grammatical tool of choice.
Let's expand on the flexibility a bit. We said we can cleave different parts of the sentence. Let's start with temporal cleaving, emphasizing when something happened.
Good idea. Imagine the simple statement. The financial crisis began in 2008. That is purely informational.
Just a fact.
Just a fact. If I want to emphasize that the timing is the critical element, perhaps contrasting it with previous periods of stability, I cleave the time element, I say. It was in 2008 that the true extent of the financial crisis became clear.
By doing that, you shift the focus from what happened, the crisis, to when it happened, 2008. You're suggesting that the timing itself carries a significant meaning.
Exactly. Now let's look at object cleaving. Take the sentence. I warned the CEO about the competition. Simple enough. But if I want to emphasize the person who received the warning, I could use a related construction often called a pseudo-cleft.
Which would be?
The person I warned was the CEO, or, using the it is structure, it was the CEO whom I warned about the competition.
That seems particularly useful in a context where there might be confusion about who was privy to the information. You're clarifying and emphasizing the recipient at the same time.
Now, here is where true C2 mastery is tested, recognizing when not to use it.
Yes. Overuse.
What happens if every third sentence you utter is a cleft sentence? What happens to the rhetorical power?
It's gone. You risk sounding, as we mentioned earlier, overly formal, highly academic, or even pompous. The emphasis becomes diluted, and the structure starts to feel repetitive and artificial.
Precisely. The cleft sentence is a high-impact structure. Like any high-impact tool, it loses its effect if it's used indiscriminately. It should be reserved for those moments in a conversation, or report, or a presentation where you absolutely must ensure the audience remembers a critical variable, a cause, or a time.
So if you're writing a simple email to your colleague, stick to the simple structure.
Please.
But if you are drafting the executive summary of a critical report where one finding dictates the entire corporate strategy, that's when you deploy the cleft sentence.
It is the grammatical equivalent of a powerful transition slide in a presentation. It forces the eye, or in our case the ear, to stop and focus on that isolated element. Mastery here is recognizing that the shift from a simple construction to a cleft sentence is a strategic high-stakes choice. It's not just an aesthetic one, it's all about controlled emphasis.
This level of grammatical manipulation truly separates the advanced speaker. We are not just structuring words, we are structuring attention.
And if you, the learner, want to practice this, a great exercise is to take 5 complex sentences from a newspaper article and try cleaving the subject, the time, and the object of each one.
Oh, that's a good idea.
See how manipulating the structure changes the tone and the perceived importance of each element? You'll quickly realize how much control the structure grants you.
As the day winds down, and we've successfully staved off fatigue and navigated all these demanding structures we just analyzed, we need to prepare for recovery.
Yes, the end game.
Let's look at the language of the evening routine. The word our sources highlighted here is decompress.
This is a phenomenal word because, like inertia, it is borrowed from a highly technical field, in this case, deep sea diving, and it has migrated perfectly into the psychological lexicon, carrying its technical weight with it.
Give us the technical definition. What does it mean for a diver?
Technically, to decompress means to relieve pressure. Specifically, it refers to divers returning to the surface after working deep underwater. They have to carefully manage the pressure changes to avoid the potentially fatal condition known as the bends.
So the entire process is about necessary systematic pressure release.
Exactly. The meaning inherently involves relief from intense external physical pressure.
And when we use it in a stress or lifestyle context?
It means to calm down and relax after a period of intense work or stress. But the nuance is crucial. By choosing this word, we are suggesting that the stress accumulated during the day wasn't merely mental or emotional.
Right.
We're implying that the stress was physically pressing down on the individual, accumulating like the nitrogen in a diver's bloodstream.
I think that's the subtle connotation we are after. It gives the experience of stress release a visceral, almost therapeutic and necessary meaning.
Yeah.
You aren't just unwinding or chilling. Those are generic terms that suggest light relaxation. When you decompress, You are actively shedding a physical weight or an internal systemic pressure that had built up over hours.
That is precisely the power of the connotation. It implies a critical, necessary, almost physiological process of returning to a stable, low-pressure state.
So if you say, I need 30 minutes to decompress before dinner after that budget review, what are you really communicating?
You're communicating the intensity of the pressure you are under far more effectively than if you simply said, I need to relax. It gives your exhaustion and your need for rest, gravitas, and seriousness.
And it suggests that if you don't take that time to decompress, you risk a metaphorical equivalent of the bends.
Exactly. Maybe a breakdown, an emotional outburst, or just continued high anxiety.
So the word implies a potential consequence for failure to relieve that pressure.
That's right. It is serious. Contrast this with relax or take it easy. Those are suggestions. Decompress is a necessity. It is a language of self-care driven by physical analogy. For you, the learner, choosing decompress in a workplace setting communicates to your colleagues that you recognize the intensity of the work and you're taking necessary steps to maintain your long-term stability.
We've looked at 5 intensely high-level terms today. What's fascinating now is how these words don't just exist in isolation. They create thematic connections that define a sophisticated worldview.
Yes.
You connected decompress perfectly with the concept of the digital sunset.
I did. The digital sunset is the intentional fading out of technology usage, turning off notifications, putting the phone away, stepping back from screens, usually 60 to 90 minutes before sleep.
Okay.
When we combine the idea of needing to decompress to relieve that physiological and mental pressure with the concept of a digital sunset, the active removal of sensory input, we are not just describing an evening routine.
We are creating a rich, connected conceptual framework. We're identifying the source of the pressure that we need to be relieved from.
Exactly. Advanced vocabulary lets you do more than just label items. It lets you construct sophisticated causal links. The pressure, which requires decompression, is understood to be exacerbated, if not directly caused, by the constant digital stimulus, which requires a sunset.
It acknowledges the relentless, non-stop nature of modern connectivity as a primary source of stress, and that it requires a deliberate boundary-setting action to counteract it.
That level of synthesis is C2 mastery in action. The speaker isn't just saying, I'm turning off my phone to relax.
No.
They are communicating a full philosophical position. I am actively engaging in a digital sunset to facilitate necessary decompression, thereby preventing the accumulation of pressure caused by information overload.
Wow.
This demonstrates how C2 proficiency enables you to define and control the atmosphere and the underlying meaning of your environment by weaving these terms into a conceptual tapestry.
It turns a simple routine change into a sophisticated, articulated strategy for well-being. And that, in essence, is what this entire deep dive has been about, elevating the mundane into the strategic.
Precisely.
This has been an incredibly detailed journey through the architecture of a single day. And I think we've clearly proven that true proficiency isn't just about knowing definitions.
Not at all.
It's about knowing when and how to use these powerful words. Inertia, austere, insulated, stave off, decompress, to convey the precise atmosphere, intent, and structural importance of your statements.
We've seen that the choice between delay and stave off, or between a simple sentence and a cleft sentence, is a strategic choice. It signals your command over the fine levers of language. You're controlling emphasis and connotation with structural precision.
And now it is time for the learner's practical challenge, drawn directly from our source material. We want you to internalize and use this advanced lexicon starting this week. The challenge is to weave 3 specific words from today's deep dive, inertia, austere, and decompress, into a single monologue or a written reflection describing a specific day or week.
This is the critical step. It's about moving these terms out of the glossary and into your active spoken or written usage. Can you construct a fluid narrative that sounds natural while incorporating these specific high-level terms?
For example, can you describe how you tackled your Monday? Maybe you had an austere morning ritual, deliberately stripped down to fight the weekend's inertia. And by 8 p.m., you knew you needed an hour entirely free of screens to properly decompress from the day's intensity.
This exercise highlights the need for rhetorical flexibility. You need to use the words not just correctly, but naturally. You have to integrate them into a fluid narrative structure that supports a higher level of complexity.
Because mastering the language of daily life is the ultimate test of proficiency.
It is, because the quotidian forces you to be versatile and genuine in your word choices.
And as we close, this raises an important final question for you, the listener, to carry forward into your week. We've analyzed how you can use specific vocabulary to express your intentions. But the final layer of C2 mastery involves reading and listening with that same analytical precision.
Think about this. How does analyzing the specific vocabulary choices other people make, even when they're discussing something as straightforward as a news item or a business proposal? How does that unlock a deeper understanding of their underlying thoughts and intentions?
Right.
If a company describes its restructuring as overcoming organizational inertia, you know immediately they're framing the problem as foundational and difficult, justifying a major shakeup. You're reading in the subtext.
So by becoming a master of deployment, you simultaneously become a more powerful consumer of information.
Yes.
You become able to decode the subtle rhetorical signals that everyone else is sending, whether they know it or not. That deeper understanding of intent, hidden just beneath the surface of the words, that's the true reward of proficiency.
We encourage you to start observing the world, not just for meaning, but for its rhetorical architecture. What words are the speakers around you using to manage your perception of their reality?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of the quotidian. We look forward to analyzing your next source stacks soon. Welcome back to the deep dive. We are continuing our ambitious exploration of modern life, what we've been calling the architecture of the quotidian.
Yes.
And we spent the last few deep dives really dissecting the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of daily structure, breaking down the vocabulary of efficiency. But today, I think we're hitting a critical point. The point where that structure starts to feel less like a support and more like a constraint.
Right. It becomes a cage.
Exactly. We're moving beyond the simple metrics of, time and action and into the darker, more pressurized psychological realities of what it means to be constantly on.
Indeed. I mean, it's really impossible to have an honest discussion about optimizing your life in the 21st century without eventually confronting the shadow side of that whole endeavor.
The shadow side, yeah.
So today, we're shifting the focus from how you build a routine to the insidious ways a perfectly constructed, optimized routine can, paradoxically, become destructive.
Which means our mission today is arguably the most vital one we've taken on in this series so far. We have to unpack this darker side of optimization, this thing that people are now calling toxic productivity.
Yes, and crucially, we need to equip you, the listener, with the advanced linguistic tools to handle it.
We're talking C2 proficiency here, the kind of language you need to actually articulate these complex internal struggles and maybe define a path toward what true rest looks like.
We really have to address the inherent cultural pressure that's driving this whole behavior. The moment you start tracking every minute, optimizing every single decision.
Viewing every moment as an opportunity.
Exactly, an opportunity for self-improvement or even monetization. You run this incredible risk of turning your life into a mechanized performance. You stop being a person and you become, a means to an end rather than the end itself.
That feeling of turning yourself into a machine, that actually brings us directly to the catalyst for this entire deep dive. We got a really poignant and, frankly, universal email from a listener we'll call Marcus in Berlin.
Marcus's situation is distressingly common. It's just the perfect diagnostic case for the modern, efficiency-obsessed professional.
So what did he say?
He wrote to us describing his meticulously optimized day. I mean, he follows all the advice you read online. He wakes up early. He does high-intensity interval training, uses detailed time-blocking techniques for his work.
Inbox zero, all of that.
All of it. He minimizes distractions. By all the external metrics, he is absolutely succeeding at optimization.
But, and this is the paradox, the crucial twist in the story, Marcus says that instead of feeling accomplished or like he's progressing, he feels profoundly stagnant. He used the phrase ticking boxes. He feels like he's just ticking boxes, but has zero authentic progression toward his major life goals. He said he feels like a high-functioning robot.
And that's the core of it.
And his question to us was, if I am doing everything right, why do I feel like I'm moving backward?
And what's missing there is the distinction between relentless mechanical activity and actual meaningful impact. Marcus is experiencing this sensation of high-effort physical and mental work.
without any real progress.
Without generating true psychological or professional progress, this feeling, this mechanical effort, without the reward, that is the hallmark of the optimization trap.
So this deep dive is going way beyond just vocabulary. We're going to unpack this specific feeling, define the psychological concepts that are missing from Marcus's life, and ultimately define what it means to be truly productive.
Which is to say, impactful and sustainable rather than just busy.
Exactly. Let's jump in. Okay, so let's unpack this core feeling of stagnation that Marcus described. When I was reading his email, his description of this relentless effort for zero reward, a technical diagnosis, just jumped out at me immediately. It's a classic case that I think every high achiever, every intensely motivated person eventually runs into when they push too hard. It's the law of diminishing returns.
That's absolutely the starting point for understanding why this kind of constant optimization eventually breaks down. The law of diminishing returns is, it's an economic principle.
Right, from manufacturing.
Traditionally, yes. It's applied to production. It basically states that after a certain point, adding an additional factor of production, let's say more hours of labor, will result in smaller and smaller increases in output.
And then eventually,
it results in no increase and sometimes even a decrease in output.
Okay, so let's apply that directly to Marcus. He starts optimizing a year ago. Waking up maybe 10 minutes earlier gives him this massive return in clarity.
Huge gains at the beginning.
Right. Implementing a 20-minute focused writing session, maybe that doubles his initial output. These initial returns are incredibly motivating. They're addictive.
Of course, because he was operating from a pretty low baseline of efficiency. When you're inefficient, the first few efforts at improvement give you these really steep, satisfying gains. But that curve, it eventually flattens out.
And Marcus has likely reached that plateau. He's at a near optimal efficiency baseline for the tasks he's performing.
I'd say so.
So now, if he tries to squeeze another 5 minutes of work into his lunch break, or he tries to wake up another 10 minutes earlier, he's just hitting the wall.
He is. The investment of that extra effort, that additional stress, is generating almost no measurable benefit.
It's a bad deal.
It's a terrible deal. He's putting in 100% more effort, incurring 100% more stress, just to achieve, 2% more output?
Yeah.
The equation just starts balancing.
And it's not just that it produces tiny results. You're saying it actually starts to degrade the quality of the work that was already productive.
Exactly. He hits a ceiling, and trying to punch through that ceiling is completely self-defeating.
So what's the specific mechanism there? Why does pushing harder actually make things worse? What's going on in the brain?
It's the missing variable. The one factor that this whole optimization culture consistently treats as disposable, and that is the crucial psychological component of rest.
Rest.
Marcus, and so many others who are trapped in this cycle, has confused rest with idleness, or even worse, with failure.
It's so interesting because in sports training, this is a given. It's an accepted fact. Yeah. You don't build muscle when you are lifting the weights.
Right.
You build muscle when you rest and recover afterwards. The workout is just the stimulus. The rest is where the actual construction happens.
And it is precisely the same for cognitive and creative work. Rest is not the absence of work. It is an active structural ingredient in the productivity recipe.
An ingredient, I like that.
But if you view rest as a luxury, or worse, as some kind of moral failure of optimization, you break the cycle of renewal that's necessary for high returns. You are simply draining your cognitive reservoir faster than it can be refilled.
Which leads you directly back to diminishing returns.
Directly. You're essentially burning muscle tissue just to maintain motion. It's unsustainable.
And this neglect of self, this relentless, almost pathological drive to maximize every millisecond of the day, that brings us directly to defining the core modern malaise that Marcus is experiencing. Toxic productivity.
This is such a powerful and necessary term because it defines the internal pressure, not just the external busyness. Toxic productivity is the pernicious idea that an individual's inherent self-worth is directly tied to their measurable output.
Or just to their perpetual busyness.
Their busyness.
And this is where we need to unpack that subtle but massive economic driver. We often hear this phenomenon linked to broader economic systems. Where do you see the influence of market pressures manifesting in Marcus's internalized sense of value?
Well, this is often referred to as internalized capitalism. It's the process by which market logic, specifically that demand for infinite growth, efficiency, optimization, is absorbed into our personal identities and our belief systems.
So we stop being people who do work.
And we start viewing ourselves as commodities that must be continually optimized and marketed. We become a personal brand.
Wow. And that transforms everything. It transforms self-care, for instance, into just another chore on the checklist.
Yeah.
You don't exercise for joy anymore. You exercise to optimize your cognitive function for the next work session. You don't read for pleasure. You read to acquire new marketable skills.
Precisely. When you internalize this market logic, your value as a human being becomes conditional upon your measurable efficiency. That's why you see people feeling obligated to post their grueling gym routines or their 4 a.m. wake-up times on social media.
It's output signaling.
It is. It's a mechanism for validating their self-worth, both to themselves and to others. It's a way of saying, look how much value I am generating.
But the feeling that Marcus describes is that the meaning has just evaporated. He's fulfilling the checklist, but the soul has gone out of the work. He's just ticking boxes.
And that phrase, ticking boxes, that's the linguistic fingerprint of stagnation. But for our listeners who are aiming for C2 proficiency, you need a stronger, more nuanced idiom to describe that feeling of mechanical repetition without any authentic engagement.
Okay, what is it?
The phrase you need is going through the motions.
Going through the motions. Yeah, that immediately implies a level of detachment, doesn't it? A sort of performative element.
Precisely. We define going through the motions as performing necessary actions mechanically, without any enthusiasm, genuine intent, or true emotional or intellectual engagement.
So when Marcus is operating this way, his body is showing up, his hands are executing the task, but his mind,
the critical creative part that actually generates value, is absent, or it's just deeply fatigued.
It's like the difference between driving a car because you love the journey and driving a car only because the GPS told you to turn left.
That's a perfect analogy. The actions are the same, but the internal state is fundamentally different. And this state fundamentally undermines high-level productivity.
So he might get the task done.
He might complete the task, but the quality is lower, the insights are shallower, and critically, the energy you get from achievement, that sense of momentum, is zero.
The irony is just profound. He's using these high-level optimization techniques, but he's achieving a low-level mechanical result because he's completely detached from the purpose.
He is.
So how does someone recognize that they've made that transition from being authentically engaged to merely going through the motions?
Well, it's insidious. It starts when the why, the passion, the mission, the curiosity, the reason you started in the first place is completely superseded by the what.
The checklist.
The checklist, the deadline, the expectation that's imposed either externally or by that internalized market pressure we talked about. If you find yourself executing steps simply because they're written down on a list, you're no longer progressing. You're just performing maintenance on the machine.
Wow.
And this complete lack of engagement is the direct, predictable result of neglecting that psychological component of rest. The work just feels heavy and meaningless.
So the goal for Marcus and for you, the listener, isn't just to stop being busy. It's to reconnect that high-effort output to genuine intent and to high-quality results.
And to do that, you have to deliberately break the cycle. You have to break the cycle of mechanical action and introduce space. So if the problem is this continuous pressured output that ignores the brain's need for deep processing and recovery, then the solution has to be a bit counterintuitive.
Right. It can't just be work smarter.
Exactly not. It's about leveraging periods of non-effort. And that brings us to a concept that is absolutely vital for reaching true mastery in any discipline, not just language, and that is incubation.
I find the word incubation so hopeful. It suggests something valuable is being protected and nurtured, developed just beneath the conscious surface, and it's just awaiting its moment to emerge.
That's a perfect articulation of it. Incubation is precisely that. It's a formalized cognitive process where you consciously step away from an active, difficult problem, and you allow your subconscious mind to engage in this low-level, nonlinear processing.
This is where the magic happens.
This is where the truly creative leaps in thought, the aha moments, this is where they often occur.
But we're so conditioned, culturally, to think of problem solving as this linear thing. Focused concentration, hours hammered out at the desk, sheer willpower applied until a solution just appears. But the science behind this suggests the exact opposite is often true.
The source material we looked at is very clear on this. The key mechanism of incubation is the act of stepping away and letting your brain shift modes. When you are intensely focused on a spreadsheet or a complex paragraph, your brain is using the focused mode of thinking.
Okay.
It's a tightly knit network, and it's excellent for linear, sequential tasks.
High intensity, high effort work.
Exactly. But when you relax, when you take a shower, go for a mindless walk, or just stare out a window, when you engage in these mundane, low-effort activities, the diffuse mode of thinking takes over.
The diffuse mode.
And this diffuse mode is terrible at linear tasks, but it is excellent at linking together seemingly unrelated bits of information. It connects the disparate ideas you acquired yesterday, the goal you were struggling with today, and that random metaphor you read last week.
So those moments that feel like procrastination, the 5 minutes you spend mindlessly watching birds outside, the long drive where you're not actively thinking about work, they're not actually wasted time.
Not at all.
They're periods of crucial, high-value cognitive work happening below the threshold of our conscious awareness. It's like the brain's internal committee is having a meeting, and we aren't invited to take notes.
That's the counterintuitive nature that we have to internalize if we want to escape toxic productivity. Doing nothing that is directly related to the problem is frequently the period when the brain synthesizes the complex solution.
And Marcus, who has optimized his day to the minute and who fills every possible gap with some productive activity.
He has effectively sterilized his schedule of all incubation opportunities. He's trying to brute force creativity and insight through sheer willpower and scheduling, which, as we established, just leads straight back to diminishing returns.
But there's a guilt factor, isn't there? If I tell Marcus to just sit still for an hour and do nothing, he might feel this immense pressure that he is failing, that he's not optimizing. How do we create the necessary conditions for insight without invoking that guilt?
That's the key question. You cannot schedule serendipity, but you can schedule the conditions for it. And the condition is space. The metaphor that perfectly encapsulates this need for deliberate non-activity is white space.
White space. It's such a beautifully simple concept in design, right? It refers to the unused margins, the gaps, the deliberate emptiness in a visual layout.
And it translates perfectly to lifestyle and to mental architecture. Think of a page of text that is just dense, packed from corner to corner with no margins, no paragraph breaks, no line spacing.
It's overwhelming.
It's visually overwhelming, it's difficult to read, and it's almost impossible to comprehend. The white space on a page is what allows the text or your life, your schedule, your thoughts to breathe. It guides your eye toward what is truly important, and it makes the whole structure comprehensible.
So Marcus, and potentially you, the listener, you don't need a better calendar app or more optimization techniques. That's just layering optimization on top of optimization.
Driving you deeper into the toxic cycle.
Right.
He needs to mandate white space. He needs mandatory, unscheduled time that is not dedicated to a specific measurable output. This white space is what facilitates incubation and provides the necessary psychological recovery.
Okay, but what does mandatory white space look like in practice? If someone is running on this high alert, toxic productivity mode, how do they introduce it without feeling intense resistance? I mean, should they literally schedule it as staring out the window time?
You know, initially you might actually have to. You might schedule it as unscheduled processing time.
I like that.
And start small, 20 minutes, maybe 3 times a week, where the rules are.
Yes.
No screen, no intentional goal setting, and absolutely no anxiety about the lack of achievement. It is mandated boredom. This time is not for consumption, it is for reflection.
So you're explicitly valuing the downtime. You're saying that the highest value activity of the day might actually be the one that looks like you're doing nothing at all.
Absolutely. If you are always producing, you are never recovering. And if you are never recovering, you are fundamentally limiting the quality and the creativity of your output. We have to remember that proficiency, whether it's in language or in life, it requires nonlinear growth.
And nonlinear growth demands nonlinear time.
Exactly. Time that is dedicated to quiet, guilt-free processing. White space is the ultimate productivity hack because it stops mechanical performance and reintroduces the possibility of high-impact insight.
That really reframes the entire discussion. We're moving from efficiency metrics to effectiveness metrics.
Yes.
And effectiveness requires rest.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem psychologically using the law of diminishing returns and defining toxic productivity. We've outlined the cognitive fix, white space, and incubation. Now we need to turn to the linguistic component.
Because if you're operating at a C2 proficiency level, you need an arsenal of phrases that can match the complexity of these feelings. Simple phrases like, I am tired, or this didn't work, they just fail to capture the nuance of burnout or strategic failure.
You need idioms that convey intensity, analogy, and sophisticated critique. These C2 idioms, they allow you to transition from merely describing a state to analyzing its profound impact and complexity.
And we have 3 specific ones that are vital for this. For articulating extreme exhaustion, measuring strategic impact, and discussing those tricky work-life balance trade-offs. So let's start with the phrase that perfectly describes Marcus's state. This unsustainable level of mechanical high-stress effort as he hits that diminishing returns wall.
That phrase would be running on fumes.
It's such an incredibly intense image. It immediately conveys an impending and an unavoidable mechanical disaster.
Precisely. The origin is powerful. It comes from a vehicle that has consumed nearly all of its petrol and is moving only on the remaining volatile vapor in the tank. It is a state that is just millimeters away from complete mechanical failure.
The moment when the engine just dies and you're stranded.
Exactly.
So if a colleague says they're tired, you might suggest they get a coffee. But if they say they are running on fumes, the situation is grave. It suggests they're operating beyond their capacity, just on sheer willpower.
It implies extreme systemic exhaustion, and it suggests an imminent collapse, whether that's physical, psychological, or professional. It is the language of crisis, not just mere fatigue. We use it to convey that the individual is functioning below the baseline requirement for quality output.
Let's talk about the nuance of how you use it. How does this differ from, say, the C1 phrase, burnt out?
That's a great question. Burnt out describes the end state, the complete static collapse. You're already there. Running on fumes describes the dangerous, prolonged process just before that collapse. It emphasizes the active, unsustainable effort that's being expended.
So it's more of a warning.
It's a huge warning. If I say, the team is running on fumes after 3 months of continuous project sprints, I'm signaling an immediate risk, and I'm justifying the need for a radical intervention, like a mandatory break for everyone.
It's a very high-stakes phrase, then. It shows the listener or your conversational partner that you're not exaggerating. You're basically declaring an emergency based on negligible energy reserves. It really emphasizes the human cost of that continuous output.
Absolutely. It is the perfect phrase for describing the sensation of toxic productivity once you are deep into that cycle of diminishing returns. You're pushing through the exhaustion barrier, clinging to this belief that motion equals progress, even when you are operating on less than nothing.
Okay, so moving on to the second idiom. This one addresses that sense of meaninglessness and stagnation that Marcus felt. The feeling of being busy, but not actually achieving anything meaningful or strategically important.
That would be to move the needle.
Right, to move the needle.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the origin and how it's applied in, say, a professional assessment.
This idiom is deeply entrenched in business and strategy language. It comes from analog gauges and measuring instruments, like a speedometer or a pressure gauge.
Oh, okay.
Where a result, a measurement, or significant change in status is indicated by the physical, visible movement of a needle. If your effort causes a measurable difference that genuinely advances the objective, you have successfully moved the needle.
This speaks directly to Marcus's problem. He is busy performing activity. He's ticking all the boxes, but the outcome is negligible relative to the enormous effort he's putting in.
He's performing high-effort, low-impact tasks. And the beauty of this idiom is its clarity. It forces you and your audience to assess the critical difference between activity and impact.
Can you give an example?
Sure.
Yep.
You can spend 10 hours organizing your email folders. That's activity. But if that task does not advance the strategic goal of, say, landing a new client, you have not moved the needle.
Right. So in a high-level conversation, you don't want someone to say, your report was a good exercise in data gathering. No. You want them to say, your findings fundamentally move the needle on how we approach this market.
It elevates the language from tactical execution to strategic assessment. For a C2 learner, applying this idiom demonstrates that you can distinguish between mere effort and genuine, measurable value creation.
And what about the context? Is this just restricted to business, or could we apply it to personal goals, like, for instance, language learning?
Oh, it translates perfectly. If you spend 3 hours passively watching TV in the target language, that's activity, but you don't retain any new grammar or vocabulary.
You haven't moved the needle.
You haven't moved the needle on your fluency. Conversely, 20 minutes of intense flashcard review, an application that really locks down a new set of idioms, that does move the needle. It shifts the focus from time spent to value gained.
Okay, that's crystal clear. And finally, the third idiom. This one is necessary to articulate the complex trade-offs that are inherent in optimization, efficiency, and modern work-life balance. We need a way to acknowledge the benefits without ignoring the risks.
And for that, we have a double-edged sword.
This one is beautifully classic. It pulls from that martial analogy of a sword that's sharp on both sides.
Precisely. It describes a situation or a decision that possesses two outcomes. A significant positive effect that is inextricably linked to an equally significant negative effect. You cannot get the benefit without incurring the risk of the drawback.
This is so critical for high-level discussion because it acknowledges inherent nuance, which is really the hallmark of C2 communication. You're stating that you understand the benefits, but you're also acutely aware of the potentially hidden drawbacks.
It's a rhetorical opposite of simple black and white thinking. It forces a balanced structural argument, and we can apply it perfectly to the quotidian architecture we've been discussing.
Okay, give us a clear application example that's relevant for our listener.
Let's take the use of AI in daily life, you could say. Relying on generative AI for content creation is a double-edged sword. You achieve incredible efficiency and speed, but you risk reducing your own cognitive resilience and dependency on human creativity.
I see. So the positive, the speed, is tied directly to the negative, the cognitive degradation.
Yeah.
Save time, but you lose intellectual muscle.
Exactly. Or, to bring it back to Marcus's life, meticulous time blocking is a double-edged sword. It maximizes resource allocation, but it eliminates the white space needed for creative incubation. You cannot just praise the optimization without addressing the hidden cost.
Right.
Using a double-edged sword signals that you are considering the complete ecosystem of that decision. You're weighing both outcomes critically. It shows a mature understanding of consequence and trade-off, moving far beyond simple praise or simple criticism.
So those three, running on fumes, moving the needle, and a double-edged sword. That's a powerful linguistic defense against the traps of toxic productivity.
It allows you to articulate the human struggle with real precision.
That's a powerful arsenal to build. All right, now we are going to change the pace a little bit. We're going to maintain that high-level C2 focus, but present a short listening challenge. This is designed to test your mastery of grammar at a really nuanced level. This is where a subtle misalignment can trip up even very advanced speakers.
This challenge will require you to apply the same intense attention to detail that we've been talking about in relation to optimization, only here, the object of your attention is linguistic structure.
So we're going to recite a specific scenario using some advanced vocabulary. Listen extremely closely and see if you can identify the one sentence that contains a subtle but definite grammatical error. Spotting this error confirms mastery.
It really does.
And just as a quick note, we're using the term sleep inertia in this scenario. For those who may not have encountered it, sleep inertia is that feeling of grogginess, disorientation, and reduced cognitive function right when you wake up.
Even if you had enough sleep.
Exactly. It's that painful, temporary lag state that we all experience sometimes.
Okay, are you ready? Here is the scenario for analysis. Listen carefully to the verb forms and the sentence structure, specifically in that final sentence. Here it is. Despite his austere morning routine, Thomas struggled to overcome sleep inertia. It was the lack of sunlight that made him feel sluggish. However, had he went to bed earlier, he might have felt more refreshed.
Okay, we'll give you a moment, just a few seconds, to run that through your internal grammar checker. Listen to the flow, listen to the verb forms, and the tense consistency.
Pause for 5 seconds.
All right. Did you catch it? If you focused intensely on that third and final sentence, you found the culprit. The sentence read, however, had he went to bed earlier, he might have felt more refreshed.
The word went is the error. But for an advanced learner, the critical question isn't just what is the error, but why is it an error? The sentence structure looks complex, it looks sophisticated, and grammatically elevated.
Yeah, and that's a common trap, right? The sophistication of the structure makes the error harder to spot.
It does.
So let's break down the sophisticated structure being used here, because understanding the structure is essential to understanding the mistake.
This error highlights a very specific C2 construction that you often see in formal speech and professional writing. It's the third conditional structure involving inversion.
Inversion, okay.
And this structure is a way to condense information and elevate formality by omitting the word if.
Okay, so let's start with the basics of the third conditional, just for context, and we can introduce the inversion part.
Good idea. So the third conditional is used to discuss purely hypothetical situations in the past, events that already occurred and cannot be changed now. It deals with counterfactuals, regrets, alternate histories.
Right.
The standard structure is if plus subject plus past perfect, which is had plus past participle, then plus subject plus perfect conditional would have or might have plus past participle.
So the full non-inverted grammatically correct sentence would be, if he had gone to bed earlier, he might have felt more refreshed. Okay, that feels familiar.
Exactly. Now, to achieve that high-level formal tone or to express high proficiency, we employ inversion. And this means we omit the word if, and we invert the subject, Thomas or he, and the auxiliary verb, had.
And that creates the phrase we heard in the example, had he.
Correct. But here is the critical, unyielding rule for the third conditional, whether you invert it or not. The main verb that follows the auxiliary verb had must always be the past participle.
Ah, and that's where the trap is. The common irregular verb to go is precisely where even fluent speakers can get caught. The forms are go, the base form, went, the past simple, and gone, the past participle.
The grammatical error we included, had he went to bed earlier, incorrectly uses the past simple form went, where the structure mandates the perfect form, the past participle, gone.
And the temptation to use went is high because it's the standard past tense we use all the time.
It is. But the presence of the auxiliary verb had dictates the use of the past participle. The error occurs because the speaker is mentally confusing the standard past tense with the past perfect requirement. They're aiming for that high-level inverted structure, but inserting the wrong form of the main verb.
So the corrected C2 proficient inverted sentence is,
had he gone to bed earlier, he might have felt more refreshed.
and if you, listening at home, recognize that specific requirement, that an inverted third conditional must retain the past participle form despite the inversion, then you are operating at a phenomenal level of attention to grammatical detail.
It's true.
That level of nuance is what truly separates fluency from grammatical mastery.
It demonstrates that the architecture of high-level language, much like the architecture of a well-planned day, requires precise components. A single misaligned verb form can weaken the entire structure of an otherwise sophisticated sentence. You just can't optimize away attention to detail.
That's a perfect connection back to our overall theme. Just as Marcus's optimized schedule failed because of a missing component, which was rest, a sophisticated sentence fails due to a misplaced component. In this case, the verb form. Mastery demands holistic integrity.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the daily routine and its psychological traps. We have covered some significant ground today.
We really have.
We've moved from a surface-level analysis of a busy schedule to a critical psychological diagnosis of toxic productivity.
We established that the law of diminishing returns dictates that neglecting that psychological component of rest renders even the highest levels of effort actively counterproductive.
And we define toxic productivity as that internalized economic pressure that links your self-worth to perpetual output, which leads to that soul-deadening state of just going through the motions.
And then we offered the structural fix, the cognitive necessity of incubation, allowing the diffuse mode of thinking to synthesize insight and the deliberate scheduling of white space.
That mandated time for recovery and nonlinear thought, which is what you need to break the cycle of mechanical effort.
And linguistically, we have armed you with 3 vital C2 idioms, running on fumes to convey that imminent collapse and unsustainable effort.
To move the needle, to distinguish sharply between mere activity and measurable strategic impact.
And a double-edged sword to articulate complex, nuanced trade-offs that are inherent in any high-stakes decision.
And then, of course, we tested your mastery with the inverted third conditional grammar challenge, proving that high-level proficiency requires impeccable attention to structural detail.
So if there's one maxim, one final thought we want you to carry forward, not just in your pursuit of knowledge, but in your daily life, it is this. Language learning, like true productivity and the pursuit of mastery, is fundamentally a marathon, not a sprint.
That's so important. The pressure Marcus feels to achieve C2 immediately, or to memorize every idiom in a week, or to optimize every second of his day, is simply another manifestation of toxic productivity.
It's the same pattern.
It is. Sustained, high-quality progress requires steady pacing and recovery. If you try to sprint the marathon, you will inevitably run on fumes and ultimately collapse.
So our final advice is, take your time. Don't push past the point of diminishing returns. Apply the principle of white space not just to your calendar, but to your cognitive life. Trust the process of incubation.
And let that nonlinear growth deliver the mastery you are truly seeking.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Goodbye for now.